Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the planning portion of the authority meeting. We are going to begin with item 12.1, 6250-22012, which is the proposed demolition of 2 existing cubicle sheds and the replacement of 1 livestock building at West Middleton Farm, Paracan. And Mr. Kinsella will explain the circumstances of this application and how we are being requested to deal with it. Mr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So we yesterday evening received an email from the agent requesting that the aforementioned planning application be withdrawn and that they wished to seek to deal with the matters that have been highlighted in the report and submit a fresh application. It is before members simply because of the authority papers had been published, and it's a matter of public record of what the officer recommendation was. So I feel it right and proper that I present this to you this morning. On the basis of the request for the application to be withdrawn, unless members consider otherwise, I'm not intending to do a presentation or for there to be any necessary debate around the merits of the scheme, but just to ensure that you are happy for officers to withdraw the application, and then we will work with the applicant as much as we can. Thank you, Chair.
So, members, it is before us. Are you happy that we should withdraw this application?
Yes.
Dr.
That
Kelly.
it be withdrawn, Chair.
Hmm?
I would move that it be withdrawn. We accept that recommendation.
Right.
Chair,
Yes.
on a point of information, talking about the scale, that's the emission from a building of that size, or is it the stock that would be in it? Can you just explain that? So that seems to be the issue. So just if you could explain it, that'd be great.
Extremely quickly, and we can come back at the end of the meeting maybe if you want to talk about it a bit more. But fundamentally, yes, it's about livestock and emissions and farming practices and emissions. The building itself obviously doesn't produce the emissions, but it can condense and concentrate and control the flow of it.
So, members, we're formally asked then to vote on the withdrawal. May I see all those in favour of the withdrawal? Right, that is passed and con. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that that has deprived us of the opportunity of hearing Mrs. Spear's presentation, but it may well yet come before us at another occasion. So if we may then move on to page 23. This is item 6323008, bid goods at Bury, a proposal for a proposed storage building, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Rose.
Yes, good afternoon everyone. Yes, this application is at Big Goods in Bury and is partly retrospective and involves the retention and modification of a storage unit that was placed on the land in the summer of 2022. The land to which the storage unit serves spans approximately 0.3 hectares, of which the applicant uses for horticultural purposes. So just to note that for planning purposes, agricultural use includes horticultural use, and therefore the application is technically applying for an agricultural storage facility. The current structure measures at approximately 2.45 metres in height, 2.24 metres in width, and 3.89 metres in length. The proposed alterations will increase the ridge height to approximately 3.6 metres, its width to approximately 2.35 metres, and its length to approximately 4.08 metres. The applicant has expressed that these modifications are necessary in order to accommodate equipment for land maintenance and associated horticultural purposes at the site. Furthermore, the application includes plans for additional planting to create a natural screen. Additionally, the proposals seek to use external materials such as timber-clad walls and a dark corrugated roofing to give the structure a more traditional appearance. So here you can see the location plan. The application site is located towards the southern periphery of Brompton Regis in Bury, adjacent to Dye House Lane. The proposed site is situated to the east of the main dwelling at Bidgoods, within a field under the applicant's ownership, which is separated from the property's curtilage boundary. Here is an aerial site plan. The site itself consists mainly of grassland, a number of trees and some shrubbery. Situated just south of the container is a mature beech tree under which the container itself is placed. Here is the existing / proposed site plan, clearly indicating the current location of the container, which is proposed to be retained. Noticeably, there are no existing agricultural buildings within this space currently, other than the container itself, and there is no indication of any prior construction of agricultural structures on the site. Here is the existing / proposed elevations plan, clearly indicating the current state of the container and what is proposed against the photograph of the current container, which is in situ. Here's the arboricultural plan, which clearly indicates the current state of the site's natural features, in addition to the proposed planting of local species hedgerow, which is proposed to be 30% hazel, 30% blackthorn, 30% willow and 10% holly. So here are some photographs of the site, starting with a view of the container, which is facing south. Here is a photograph facing west, behind the container, showing its distance to the mature beech tree. It is worth noting that although our woodlands officer here at the National Park hasn't provided official written feedback, I have had verbal confirmation that they have no concerns from an arboricultural perspective, given that the container is situated on sleepers, which minimises its physical contact with the ground itself. And here is another photograph facing west again, showing the entrance of the container itself. So moving on to the key issues. The key issues related to this application pertain to the principle of the development itself, siting and design, and the potential impacts on heritage assets. Regarding the development's principle, policy SES 4 requires new agricultural buildings to be closely related to existing structures and to serve a functional need. However, Exmoor National Park remains unconvinced that the applicant has demonstrated a compelling and overriding functional need for the storage unit, especially given its isolated placement. This is due to unclear details about the horticultural activities on the site itself, specifically surrounding if there is actually a horticultural business being run, or if the landowner simply grows plants, etc., for their own leisure and enjoyment. In terms of siting, design and potential heritage impacts, policy CES 6 underscores the importance of high quality, sustainable designs that enhance the local identity and built environment. It also emphasises the need for new buildings to be well sited and built to an appropriate scale, which would positively contribute towards its setting. Concerning the proposed amendments to the unit, such as timber cladding and a dual pitch steel roof, these do align with policy CES 6 of the local plan, which promotes the use of traditional sustainable building materials. However, the unit's isolated placement remains non-policy compliant at the moment due to the lack of justification for its functional needs, and as such, its siting is considered unacceptable at this time. It's also prudent to note that if the applicant can successfully demonstrate a compelling need for such a storage facility, as the first test outlined by policy SES 4, it's advisable to consider a more aesthetically pleasing option like a wooden shed, in line with the criteria outlined in policy CES 6. Additionally, whilst relocating the storage facility closer to the Bidgoods dwelling would be preferable, its design scale and placement must carefully be considered as to positively contribute toward the Grade 2 listed building and the character and setting as per policy CE D3. It's also worth noting that whilst the Parish Council have supported the proposals in this case, that the application has raised objections from the local residents, from some local residents, as outlined within my report. So, therefore, taking into account these issues raised within the officer's report and all other material considerations, it's concluded that the proposals are contrary to the policies outlined within the Exmoor National Park Local Plan. Whilst this is noted that the scheme will incorporate the use of sustainable and traditional building materials, these aspects collectively, are not considered sufficient to outweigh the primary concerns raised regarding the lack of justification for the agricultural building and its isolated placement as well. As such, the case officer recommends that planning permission be refused in this case in accordance with the reasons as set out on this slide and included within my report. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. We have two speakers who have registered. The first is Mr. Arnold, who is a neighbour of the site. Mr. Arnold, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. If you could just check that the microphone is on. Okay. As I say, 2 minutes from when you start to speak. Thank you.
So just Mark Arnold, giving some context as a neighbour. Bidgoods has had a succession of planning applications since 2019 and has basically been a building site throughout this time. As part of the building works, 3 already pre-existing garden outbuildings of significant size have been repurposed to various means. In addition, the garden has already had new replacement greenhouse of increased size, a new log store outbuilding used for an air source heat pump, external privy and presumably for logs, and a yet to be added further garden arbour building. To date, the site's been unoccupied since 2019, apart from builders. I don't really understand the need for further buildings in this space. The application is for a further building in a small half-acre field located next to the property, for which planning approval for a solar array was granted in 2021. At the same time, an application for an equipment store building similar to this was put in, but was withdrawn. The application was amended and withdrawn. Subsequently, despite the withdrawn application, during the 2022 Easter Bank holiday, machinery created hard standing for this proposed site on this application, and a shipping container was plonked upon it, and it's been there ever since. The application, from my perspective, does not adequately demonstrate any overriding agricultural need for the proposed further building. The application has amended the original planning statement, which originally stated that the building was required to store equipment for maintenance to include extra information about beekeeping. I noticed that since the shipping container has been in this location, there were no beehives on the site until the time point at which the planning application was amended. Due to the building's site and isolated location, I personally consider it to have a detrimental impact on the wider landscape and believe it is contrary to policies in the Exmoor local plan, namely those ones outlined by Joe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Perfect timing. And our next speaker is Mr. Blakeman, who is the agent for this application. Mr. Blakeman, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. If you could just turn the microphone on, please. Thank you very much.
Fine, thank you. First of all, a couple of inaccuracies in the previous statements that you've heard. Beehives were on site when I first have been to site. They can't be seen from any public land, so I'm not sure how the previous speaker would know unless he's been trespassing. Anyway, I'm sure many of you here have gardens or land that needs to be maintained, and most of it, most of you will all have some form of building to store the equipment. Could you manage without it, I would ask. In this case, the storage unit has a floor area of 7.7 square metres. That's less than half of that of a typical single garage. We have about an acre of land, not half an acre as previously mentioned, that's being carefully maintained with wildlife and biodiversity in mind, with the reintroduction of rarer species of apples to form a traditional orchard and meadow, which this land once was, and with an important place for bees. Whilst the officer I met on site said bees weren't important, this is a view that perhaps is not shared by many and maybe not shared by you. The building is specifically required for the safe and secure storage of equipment required to maintain the land. That includes a small tractor that is used to cut the grass, for which it is specifically designed, having a 48-inch or 1.22 metre cutter underneath. There's also a ride-on mower, beekeeping equipment, trimmers, and all the various other tools used for taking care of the field's trees, hedges, and meadow. It's been suggesting that the potting shed in Big Goods Garden could be used, but part of this has now been annexed and specifically set aside by the ecologists to be used solely for bats. My client does not even have a key or is allowed to enter that part of the building, and the remainder of that building is too small. The location of the building has been carefully considered, and we would suggest that it's well located such that it cannot be seen from the public realm. It does not impact on the setting of the listed building, as the previous application would have done. The existing trees and additional planting provide more than adequate screening. If any of you have been to Bury, you'll be well aware that the building cannot be seen from the public realm. I've got just one paragraph to go, if that's okay. The proposal was retrospective because the applicant was under the impression the applicant did not think that permission was required, because technically the structure is a movable chattel, it's not actually a shipping container. The proposal includes works, as discussed with the officer that I met on site, to give the building a more traditional appearance. The Parish Council have supported the application, and that may also be an important consideration if you actually in fact agree that local decision making is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blakeman.
I'd be happy to take any questions. If
I'm afraid
that's fine.
we can't encompass that within the meeting, but thank you very much for the points that you've made. Thank you. Okay, members, would anybody like to speak about this application, please? We have a clear recommendation from the planning officers. Now we are a sharp-focused committee of 12. I was hoping for direct, sharp engagement. Dr. Kelly, you're like...
I will respond to that, Mr. Chairman. I mean, on the surface, this looks rather a trivial one, doesn't it? You know, essentially, it's a small building. Even when it's extended, it's going to be below 10 square metres in size. Page 27 does say that the proposal would undoubtedly improve the aesthetic of the current storage unit. However, its isolated placement within the open countryside still remains non-policy compliant due to the lack of justification surrounding its functional need. I just wanted to clarify, just at this point, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is one of refusal, and it seems to be on two grounds, though. So it says that it fails to adequately demonstrate the overriding agricultural need for the building. So the lack of functional need seems to be the first reason, and then it goes on to say, which by virtue of its siting and isolated location is considered to have a detrimental impact upon the wider landscape. And yet we're being told on page 27 this would improve the aesthetic. So I just wanted to understand, do we have two objections to this proposal, or because of the improvement in the design are we saying we've got the two concerns? So if I may put that to the officer. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so essentially the first stage that we need to be satisfied with is the overriding functional need for the storage facility itself. It's not that design considerations are not important in this case, but effectively it comes second to proving that building has got a functional need, and once that has been done, then we can sort of consider things as to its siting and design. So what we were sort of trying to get at in the report is that it's undoubtedly having the building or the container clad in natural materials would improve its aesthetic to what is currently there on the site at the moment, but what we're trying to figure out before that is whether there is actually a functional need for that container as it is at the moment to be located on the site, whether there is a functional need.
Ray.
Thank you much for the report. Just going through, I'm looking on Google Maps here, and I'm struggling to see the logic of positioning the building where it's being proposed. It is isolated, and I can see lots of tracks going across to it. So it's almost like it's being put the furthest point from the road and from the building. So even from a logical viewpoint, let alone planning, I struggle. And then the agriculture use, I'm a great supporter of agriculture and supporting agriculture, but again, looking at the plots and the air and what we've heard, I can't see a great demand for agricultural equipment, and therefore I can't see that market. And I believe there are other buildings anyhow for lawn mowers. So yeah, I concur with what you're saying on those two key points.
Do you concur to the point of wishing to propose it as a recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, so you're proposing refusal?
Refusal, yes.
Was that seconded?
It is.
Right. Mrs Nicholson.
I just wanted a tiny bit of clarification. To understand for certain, when we're talking about an agricultural need, we're talking about a business need and not a domestic need. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Do any other members wish to comment or speak? At the moment we've just got a proposal for refusal. Mr Cravis.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the question probably again for the officer is, you've got a situation where obviously from a local plan point of view, it's contrary to the local plan because it's an isolated location away from other buildings, etc. Even if you could justify the use of the building, well, extremely large shed, I suppose. But then, if it wasn't in such an isolated location, would it then be contrary because it would be affecting the setting of a listed building? Is that right? Is that where I am with this?
So yeah, so effectively I think the local plan does stipulate that isolated buildings can be located in isolated places, so as that there is an overriding functional need that is proven for it to be there, which is obviously the first test towards having a building in an isolated placement. There is obviously, as I've outlined within my report, consideration for it would be better if it was more closely related to other existing buildings on the site, but obviously there is that added element that Bidgood is a Grade 2 listed building as well. So again, it is about providing that there is an overriding functional need in the first instance, and then if and when that can be achieved, obviously the design of any subsequent application that would come in, it would need to be respectful to the surrounding of the listed building, but it's sort of hard to determine that at the moment without a...
Just to follow up and add to what Joe's just said. So what we're not here to do today is to see whether there is a different solution. We're here to consider the proposal before us. Officers have set out the reasons why we believe this is contrary to the policies within the plan and therefore should be refused. I think if as a result of the meeting the application is refused, then of course it's open to the applicants to come to us and talk to us about whether there are better locations, but that would need to be informed by discussions with historic buildings officers, with landscape officers, to ensure that appropriate location is found for landscape and historic building purposes, but also to talk to us about that overcoming those policy objections that we believe were set out in the report. So the answer is yes, there is a potential for us to sort of say no to this one, and then you try and find another location and there isn't one. Now, unfortunately, that happens sometimes. Sometimes development just is not acceptable in a certain location, and nobody should be afraid to make that decision that that's the case. But of course, we will always work with applicants to see if there are those suitable locations. Thank you.
Can I come back?
Yes.
Well, I was actually going to come back and say, in which case, I think you've answered that too. In which case, I'm happy to second the proposal.
Thirding it, I think.
Oh, second.
Yes. So it's been proposed by Mr Bray, seconded by Dr Kelly, thirded by Mr Cravis. But does any other member wish to speak? Well, in that case, I will put it to the vote. May I see all those in favour of refusal, please? Right, that is passed nem. Con. Thank you very much. So that stands refused. Okay, thank you. So we move on then, ladies and gentlemen, to page 31. And this is 6/24/23/004, 2 Woodford Cottages, Woodford, Willerton, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is a retrospective application for the retention of a replacement shed and dog run in the rear residential curtilage of 2 Woodford Cottages. The application site itself is shown on a wider scale on the slide in front of you and highlighted in red, and forms part of a terrace of dwellings that collectively are listed buildings, grade 2. This shows the site in a little bit more detail, and you can see that the property is central within the terrace. The surrounding area is characterised by large, relatively narrow rear gardens. I would just point out to members in terms of the surrounding properties as well that there is a number of outbuildings towards the end of those garden areas that was considered as part of the proposal. This again just shows it in probably a little bit more clear form in terms of the relevant gardens. The application site, if you see my mouse, is in this location here. This, and I apologise for the quality because it's not great, but just shows an elevational drawing of what I'm about to show you on some of the photographs later, so I won't dwell on it too long, but you can see in terms of the width, it's just over 3.5 metres, 2.3 metres high to ridge, and a length of approximately 3, 4, 5, about 6 metres, quickly doing my maths, in length. So the next slides show a variety of photographs. This is taken of the building in question. Again, I'll just draw your attention to the right-hand side of the photograph where you can see evidence of other outbuildings in neighbouring properties. And this has led officers to consider that the principle of the development is an acceptable one. This photograph focused on a sort of a dog exercise area to the front of the shed. It's this element of the scheme which has attracted some concerns from local residents and from the parish council, and I'll address those shortly. Again, just showing the general design, the metal grid on the hard standing. So in terms of the main considerations, concern has been raised by some local residents that housing the dogs in the dog exercise areas may cause some impact on surrounding amenity through noise, barking dogs, and that disturbing the tranquility of the area. Your officers have tried to engage with Somerset Environmental Health to seek their advice and their views. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get a response. We have tried for a number of months before bringing it before members. And so it's left for officers to consider the impact. Now, clearly as part of the proposal, and if there was 3 or 4 dogs in this area, then there would undoubtedly be the potential for harm to residential amenity through the noise, through the dogs being sighted in there. However, of course, that only relates to the building itself, and there's nothing stopping anybody having a number of dogs at the property. There is no limit on that, and they themselves would cause some impact. Now, the concern that has been raised is that there might be dogs in association with a chute. The application submitted clearly states that that isn't the case, and regardless of that, this application isn't for a change of use of land to a commercial chute, so it's on a domestic scale. You can see from the officer report there are a number of conditions that seek to control the number of dogs that are kept within that building, along with its general use being ancillary to the residential use, and they are felt to be appropriate and adequate mitigation for any concerns that may be brought forward. In terms of the noise, while there may be some noise associated with its use, officers are happy that that the impact is an acceptable one. It's also worth remembering that if in the future there was concern associated with the noise from this particular building, then there is legislation that is governed by the Environmental Health at Somerset who could also take separate action besides this. But it is important that we do balance the impact on the amenity and neighbours in your planning considerations. We've also considered the impact upon the setting of the listed building, the dwellings themselves. As I said at the start of the presentation, there is evidence that a number of properties have a number of outbuildings in their rear gardens. It's considered, given the distance from the listed building, given the scale of the development and the nature of the surrounding area, that this doesn't appear out of character, and it's not considered to have an impact upon the setting of the listed building. Those comments are supported by the Historic Buildings Officer, and I would just note with regards to the noise, I'm sure members have read it, but in the comments from the Historic Buildings Officer, they do touch on the issue of noise, which states, while the setting of heritage assets can be harmed by noise, and not of the nature of the use of the outbuilding would in this case cause harm to the setting of the listed building. Therefore, subject to the conditions set out at the end of the officer report, the officer recommendation is to approve the application, and I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have one public speaker listed, and that is Mr. Mansfield. Mr. Mansfield, if you'd care to come forward, please, to the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. If you could just check that it's on at the top.
1, 2, oh, sorry.
Yes.
Just used to this.
Okay?
Just, yeah, we're on.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. So 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. Good afternoon, members. I'm the applicant's father, and I've just come here today to outline a couple of, to explain some points that were raised earlier. We actually erected the shed because the previous shed actually fell down when we purchased the property in January of this year. We did in fact try to sort of re-establish the existing shed, but quite innocently it just fell down. It's simple as that. It was very old. It was over 25 years old, and so I engaged someone to actually erect a new shed and the associated dog bits and pieces that are on it, all in good faith, and I didn't realise that at the end of the day we should have had planning permission, but I've learnt that lesson. I would just say that in respect of the conditions, I fully accept the conditions that have been applied. I have actually spoken to some of the neighbours. The cottage, when Michael purchased the cottage, had been empty for some time. The adjacent property next door has got dogs, and obviously when dogs suddenly move into an area, the dogs next door do tend to want to make a bit of a rumpus, saying hello. However, since they've all been socialised, there has not been that situation. I did in fact speak to the neighbours on a couple of occasions when we first put the dogs in. There seemed to be some concern that my son was going to be operating a breeding kennels from the property, which he has no intention of doing so. But the pets are there for his own use, as it were, and in fact, because of the size of the cottage and the adjacence of the shed that's next to it is just for storing things like his lawnmower, etc., that you normally have in a shed. So that's all I would say on it, and I don't know if anyone would like to ask me any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansfield. Unfortunately, we can't take questions as part of the organisation of the meeting, but thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. Members, over to you, Mr. Cravis.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I should point out that it's in my division, but I think I've got a little comparative council meeting tonight. Yeah, for those that I know the site, obviously, because I've walked around the back. It's always difficult trying to knock on those doors. With regard to the other sheds and things, anyone who's actually seen it from a visual amenity point of view, that's probably the best quality one out the back of all the outbuildings, if my recollection serves me right. With regard to, all I can say is apologies for EHO's lack of response, Dean. I just think they've probably got the same resource issues that many have, but obviously that would be dealt with by them. So with that in mind, I'm happy even as division councillor. No, not. Yes, I am. I've said it now. I propose I move the recommendation.
Right, thank you, Mr. Cravis. We're with you, thank you. Is that seconded, please? Right, Mr. Ellicott. Do you wish to speak, Mr. Ellicott?
No.
Okay. Any other members wish to speak, Mr. Bray?
I'd just like to clarify a couple of points, Dean. We talked about the dogs and this not being a commercial shoot. Does it make a difference if this person happens to work for a commercial shoot and use the dogs at that shoot? Presumably not, because I'll let you answer that question. And then secondly, if that shed wasn't there, presumably the dogs could roam around the garden and we could do nothing about it anyhow, so containing them in a shed can only be a positive. So yeah, I'll answer. Yeah.
So in terms of the use, yeah, I think the spirit behind the condition is to ensure that we didn't have a large number of dogs being concentrated within the building that was being used by a commercial shoot, and so therefore you almost end up with a change of use of the site because it becomes a mixed use rather than a residential. So the fact that somebody might work for a shoot and have dogs, we're all allowed to have dogs if we wish to, so that's absolutely fine. And then the second point was, sorry, my mind's gone blank.
I was just really talking through, and my assumption
was
to
garden.
verify the
Yes.
fact that if the shed wasn't there, we couldn't do anything about the dogs roaming the garden anyhow.
Yes, absolutely. You are
As a planning
absolutely correct in that. My only, because I had very similar thoughts. The only thing that you have to just be mindful of is obviously it's very different in nature having dogs run around a garden and then come into the house than them potentially being there all night, for example, which you could have here. So it's just worthwhile having that. Now, we've given consideration to that, and we still think it's acceptable as it stands. But just to be very clear, they are very slightly different in their nature.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Are there 4 dogs there or 5 dogs? Because the condition is to limit it to 4 dogs, but we're talking about 4 or 5, and how would you monitor that anyway?
Well, I think in terms of, the condition's clear, it says 4 dogs, so that's how many would be able to be kept within the building. In terms of monitoring, it would be the same as any other condition, really. So if neighbours noticed there was additional dogs there, then they would contact us and we would go and have a conversation with the owner, and we'd seek to rectify that one way or another. So we're confident we can monitor that.
Good. Any other points, ladies and gentlemen? If not, it's been moved by Mr. Cravis, seconded by Mr. Ellicott. May I see all those in favour, please? Again, that's passed and con. Thank you very much. Thank you. That sounds good. So we move on to item 13, which is applications delegated to the Chief Executive, and Mr. Kinsella will give us the edited highlights before we go through page by page.
Thank you, Chair. So it's only a couple, I think, I need to raise throughout the list. So on the first page, the second one down, you'll note that there was a non-material amendment related to land adjacent to Bossington Stables, Bossington Lane, Porlock. Quite a lot of planning history associated with this. We were notified that it's actually an historic planning permission for 4 units. 1 unit was built at the point in which planning permission was gained, and then it was left fallow until recently, where the land changed hands and the new owners have sought to continue to implement that original 2006 planning permission. The slight issue is we received reports that the second property that's being built hadn't been built in a correct place, and following an investigation, it was found that the dwelling was actually 3 metres in the wrong location. This has caused issues to the wider permission in terms of the interaction between some of the properties, and so we've come to the view that it's not a non-material amendment to be able to retain the property in the location that it has currently been built. So we've said that it's not non-material. It's open to the applicant to now come in with a full application, or failing that, then obviously we'll have to continue with our enforcement investigations and consider what, if any, action we choose to take. So that's the first one. I don't know if anybody's got any questions on that one before I move on. And the second one is on the second page again, the second one down, Marshwood, which was a lawful development certificate. So the certificate sought our acknowledgement that the development of the property that was approved in 2008 was actually not built in accordance with the original approved plans, and therefore the conditions that were attached to that original planning permission did not apply. One of those conditions related to the occupancy of the property as an agricultural rural worker. We, as you can see, have refused that certificate because of, while it is correct that the property isn't in the exact location of that planning permission, it's considered that it is sufficiently accurate that they have implemented the planning permission. Now, giving consideration to that certificate, if I remember correctly, we gave some weight to the fact that conditions had been discharged previously in the implementation of the planning permission, and that all of the development was still within the original red line, which were factors that we felt were relevant. I think in terms of the location of the property as well, it was something like a metre or so in the wrong location, so had a very clear overlap when considered in relation to that original site plan. And so we refused that, and it's of course open to the applicants to appeal it, but given the fact that our planning policies are very clear around limiting new build dwellings to either local needs affordable or for rural workers, I think this is a really positive decision that we've made, and hopefully we could be able to...
Before you leave that one, could I just expand on that point a bit, because there is another development elsewhere in the national park where actually the property has actually been constructed a metre outside the red line area. And I think there's a difference here, isn't there? And one reason why I think we must always be very cautious about saying, oh, well, it's only a little bit outside where it was supposed to be, because it does open up the possibility that we then get challenged that, well, as it's not being built in accordance with the plans, therefore the conditions don't apply. And we have to be very cautious about this, don't we?
Absolutely right, Chairman. And you know, the example that you've just been given is a very, very useful example in that with Marshwood, it was all within the red line. So in terms of the conditions that were imposed, they were imposed on the red line. This other example, it is an unfortunate example, but it's an example where somebody and officers believe that it was very accidental, but have managed to put it just outside the red line. But that is a crucial factor in determining whether something can be considered to be implementing a planning permission or not. Even if it's only just outside, that is a matter that unfortunately is, pardon the pun, is a bit of a red line for us.
And has to be, because otherwise, as you say, there's case law where the conditions have been challenged and somebody could get basically a restricted market dwelling which suddenly becomes an open market one, and therefore worth a considerable amount more. Mr. Thwaites.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, really. Does that mean if it's outside the red line, it has planning permission, or it hasn't?
It would mean it hasn't, unless they can show that they carried out those works for a period of time, your 4 or your 10-year rule, then it wouldn't have planning permission. And the example that we've we've been talking around a little bit, is an example where somebody's done it and are part way through that development, and they've come to us very honestly and said, we've sort of built it in the wrong place. What do we do about it? Yeah, and that gives us a difficult question.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else you want to draw our attention to?
No, Chair, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
If not, we'll do it page by page. Anything on page 1 that any member wishes to raise? Page 2? Or page 3? In which case, before Mr. Ellicott goes, I can say that site visits, if there are any, will be on the 1st of December in the morning. And can I draw your attention to the fact that, just picking up the point I was making earlier about the number of members at this meeting, curiously enough, we have 4 Somerset members, 1 Devon County Council member, 1 North Devon District Council member, 4 Secretary of States, and 2 Secretary of States and 4 parish members, but collectively they do make up the 6 of Secretary of State appointees. So you reflect what the Planning Committee will become.
Top team.
You might think that. Right, and Mr. Kinsella wants to make one comment before we close.
Just a final point. It may have slipped you all by, but you'll remember a couple of meetings ago, we had an application at land at Bryant's Hill, and at the time you agreed to defer that application, and I made the very clear and bold statement that we will bring it back in 2 cycles. Well, we're at that 2nd cycle and we haven't brought it back. Now, I have been in discussions with the chair around this matter. It's simply that we are working constructively with the applicant, but isn't quite there. Yes, and so we are desperately trying to get to the place where we might be able to come back with a positive recommendation. So it felt a bit unfortunate as a matter of process for me to drag it back instead of leaving it for 1 or 2 cycles to get it right. So that is the why, and I apologise we didn't do that. So there you go.
But I'm aware that there are lots of local people trying to get it to the right place, because he just doesn't seem to be able to do it at the moment.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if there's nothing else, I will declare the meeting closed. I don't know what's supposed to happen now, because the triple conversation is still obviously carrying on, and it might be a long time before they're prepared to come back to do the Pine Martin discussion. But
in which case we might go on.
well, I'll have to leave it to your judgment, ladies and gentlemen. But I will formally declare this part of the meeting closed. But I'm afraid I don't have the capacity to close. Well, I suppose I do really, because the chairman's not here, and I am still, until we are reformed, the deputy chairman. So I will close the lot. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.